Hi, everyone. Welcome to another collaboration episode between Baiguan Radio and eState. My name is Robert Wu. I'm the CEO of Baiguan Lab, China's leading alternative data company, and also the founder of Baiguan Newsletter. With me is my co-host, Johnny Zhou of East 8 Newsletter. Johnny is a leading China-based private equity investor and he also writes at East Day Newsletter. So every week, me and my friends like Johnny, we try to organize this kind of sharing and talk with you to go through some of the most important events of the last week about China. Hi, Johnny. So I think it's been a really eventful week. There are just so many things we can talk about. And actually, a major item right now is ongoing, right? Right now in Switzerland, China and US are having this high level trade negotiation where everyone is paying attention to. So why don't we start from here among many other very important things? And I think it's really a highly watched event. Everyone is turning their attention to Switzerland right now, and there's no shortage of misinformation as well, fake news. I think it's last night that there was this Twitter account, Walter Bloomberg, which by the way has no connection to Bloomberg. He, I think he started with saying there was this abrupt kind of disagreement, suspension of the talk, and the Chinese delegation just walk away or something. But turns out it was just totally fake. The talk was ongoing. It seems from the Trump's latest tweets that the talk has been going well, but I'm not sure because no details have been shared yet. But at least at this point, it's normal. The trade negotiation has been going on normally. There hasn't been any much surprises. Johnny, what do you think the talk will lead to, as far as you know at this moment?
Obviously, it's still too early to tell, but I do think that given the length of the discussion, I think there's some reports saying it took 8 hours for the first day, right? That's quite long for an initial talk. And I believe the overall, at least the vibe, is a bit better than the sort of Alaska talk back in 2021 between the Biden administration and China, which is the first talk at that time. I think the first couple of hours, because I think it's broadcasted, and some of the footage came out is rather, you would say combative, or rather you would say there's something that doesn't sound like it's goodwill. But at least, despite the fake tweets saying that the Chinese have left the hotel, but it ended up just being having a lunch break. So I think it's actually been quite good, given the discussion length is quite long, which means that they probably, freely and also very openly exchange their views on all the issues both sides may have. So let's see. And they also deliberately picked a Saturday, which means that such type of tweet won't alter the market.
Otherwise, you will see this huge swings in the market. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think the both sides have goodwill to pick the date. And yeah, I'm actually quite hopeful that, well, at least it should be a pretty good initial talk that probably there's a lot of follow-up items, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah, I think what's encouraging is the talk has been now being done by this level of officials, right? It's not the top, right? These are the, at best, aides to the top leadership. But at the working level, a lot of the real discussion can happen. And I think this really the only chance for these people who are high enough in the bureaucracy, but then also low enough not to be too politically minded to talk, to share information with each other. So I think that's one of the good comments I saw last night when people were discussing whether the tweet was fake or not, was that the commentator of that piece of comment that I saw basically said that it's not possible for them to break the negotiation in the middle because right now is the great moment for those people at this level to understand each other, to share information with each other. it's not their job to show whatever political messaging, or it's not their job. The job is to get information. The job is for them to assess the situation. So I think it's good. And also it's encouraging to see some kind of power has been already delegated to, at least on the US side, right? The Trump up to Scott B tweet is quite interesting. Right. So yeah, I think in any way, I don't know exactly how this will end up, but I guess it could be some kind of, both sides are trying to or tone down or dial down the previous kind of crazy tariffs. And another thing is, which is, I don't think it's confirmed by the Chinese side, but it's being reported by mainstream Western media, is that besides Vice Premier He Lifeng, Public Security Minister Wang Xiaohong, who is also a member of the General Secretariat of CPC, is also in Switzerland. I can't confirm it because China side doesn't confirm it, but if it's true, then I think it's also good news. I know for a fact that the whole fentanyl thing, whether it's fair to China or not, it's aside, but let's just look at the issue has been a key focus for the US side as well. So having the kind of a security chief in as part of the negotiation, I think that's encouraging as well, right? It does shows it's not just about trade, but China is willing to talk from different angles to solve this more bigger issue. Yeah, so I think overall I think we should be cautiously optimistic about the outcome of this round of talks. Yeah. So
I think there's one thing that I want to add is that basically what Trump has done is that he basically throw out whatever US-China trade relationship has done since China entered into WTO back in 2001. And we have a vague memory back then that the trade negotiation took almost a decade to complete. So it's going to be a lot of work, actually, even Trump is not so detail-oriented. But I guess it's always good to have some leadership role involved, but not the top, right? Someone like Trump who's not very into these technicalities and just want fame and big news. And if that's the case and he participated in the talks, then it's a bit tough to make it really work. So I guess, yeah, I'm actually quite surprised that the two sides actually really willing to spend a lot of time together to go through the issues.
yeah, as you say, it's going to be a long process. It's a rewiring of the whole trading system in the whole world. And I think if you look at the recent kind of high level deal between US and UK on trade, is UK as the big that trade deal. I think one aspect I found interesting is basically it also includes this provision by the US that the UK would have to basically comply with the US requirement on supply chain security. So meaning if there's any third party country is choosing to invest in UK's manufacturing or whatever, it seems to me the language suggests the US will have a veto power. So I think that's a direction the world is moving toward too. The world separated into different trading blocks or supply chain blocks. And that whole thing would also need time to be implemented. And right now, there's only one country that has done this with the US. And because UK have a special relationship with the US, it's easier to imagine. But it's also hard to imagine other countries to sign exactly the same thing with the US. But there may be modifications, there may be changes. It's just going to be, as you said, it's going to be a just long train ride with a lot of tweaks and changes between different bilateral relations. And we are just in the very beginning of it. Yeah. And talking about the reconfiguration, I think there is something that's really interesting that has an implication for China's defense industry of this week. I think nobody expected this become top of the news, but it is. the last week, which was this conflict between Pakistan and India, where and there's a lot of information, right? It's like both sides saying different things, and there's just too much noise. But I think one thing is for sure is that some Chinese fighter jets have taken down some French-made Rafales in this air combat, and which is quite surprising because the J-10 fighter jet in China is not really like the most advanced weapon, while the French one is actually said to be on par with F-22, is like really advanced weapon. But it seems like a one-sided victory. And that's surprising, but also I put it in the context of the trade relationship in that the I think up to until this point, when people think about Chinese weapons, they don't really rank it among the most high quality ones because after all, there hasn't been a war going on. The Chinese advanced weapons in the last 2 or 3 decades hasn't been really tested in battles, but now is a live demo. So I'm not a military expert, but it seems to me to be a pretty important event where the international market will look at the Chinese defense industry and say, oh, actually, they actually produce pretty good quality of products. Yeah, so I think in that sense, some kind of supply chain or some kind of trading relationship will also be changed forever. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is probably also one of the very remarkable events happening this year. I think it started with probably India looking to take advantage of the current situation because everybody is quite busy with their own stuff, right? And so they want to probably take advantage of Pakistan in this particular scenario, but it ended up backfiring because of this fighter jet thing. I think what is an interesting comment or an interesting analysis of this whole thing is that actually there have been some military experts looking into this and saying it's rather not about the single jet of China that really stand out, but it's really the whole coordination system, or you would call it the training that took place way before that, then make Pakistan sort of overall military defense a bit stronger, at least than what India has expected. And so this obviously leads to an appreciation of what China's military power will be if it really took place in a real battle, right? But I also think it's a very clever display from the Chinese side because sometimes you don't need to really fight a war to showcase your power. And this is all about defense. And if the Pakistan sort of overall military force has demonstrated well in the battles using Chinese weapons, it's surely going to deter a lot of sort of thinking about, oh, maybe China can be take advantage of, or those countries with Chinese weapons are of a lesser quality, right? So I think this is a very remarkable event. I think it ended up the end of this whole story, which surprisingly actually also took place this week, is that they both decided to call it a halt, which I think is a good thing because obviously these are two nuclear powers and it's obviously not going to end well if they ended up into a full-blown military war. But I think from the India side, it's been quite radio silent apart from some press conferences. And I think it plays a role in the sort of also the Indian sort of mindset as well, whether they wanted to take a more venturous sort of approach into these type of stuff going into the future. So I think it is a remarkable event, especially it all almost take place this week.
Yeah, just to echo a bit about your point about it's not a single jet, it's a whole system. So I did read some of the articles on how exactly this thing could happen, and it was recommended by some of the defense industry experts I know. It's quite amazing, and later I also saw some videos that I think accurately portray what is really going on. So basically, when you think about air combat, you thought about Top Gun kind of thing, dogfight, airplanes pointing guns at each other, pointing missiles at each other. But I think that era has ended. So right now, it's really like long range, long distance combat. Some airplane throwing a missile at the direction of the enemy. And then you have all these ground-based radars, air-based radars, and all these systems feeding data to the missile. And for some time, the missile is maybe even losing the power. They may be just like floating in the sky. And until at the very end, it kind of power up. And then that's the reason that for Rafale, they have very advanced capability to detect the attack. But if the time was too short, then the window it will be too short for them to react. So as you said, it's a whole system. And it does show that the Chinese approach to defense is really a systematic approach, right? It's not just like one specific type of weapon, but the whole system of training, equipment, and the whole, and very data driven as well. There's a lot of data going on, a lot of sharing from different equipments going on. Yeah. So I think that's really amazing. And it's not something that people will get to see in normal times. But yes, so I think this will be a key episode for the China's defense industry. And look at the share prices, right? All the major defense stocks in China have been surging since Wednesday. Yeah. So maybe let's shift gears a little bit. At the same time, we talk about weapons, we talk about defense, but at the same time, there was also a big military parade going on in Moscow this week, basically commemorating the 80th years anniversary of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany, where a bunch of countries also joined the parade, including China, including Vietnam. To me, though, it's more symbolic than the actual substance. Although all the different militaries, they join in the same parade, but I tend not to overanalyze this. I think it's just a kind of show of solidarity in our world. What do you think? Do you think there's anything that we need to take an interpretation out? Or, yeah.
I think the historical commemoration is obviously the key here. What China is really trying to indicate is that World War II is still a very important heritage of the humanity. And so the sort of result of it and also the end implication of it should always be commemorated. I think this is from the Chinese angle. Obviously, if you're taking a step further, then it's all about China is still very close to Russia from a geopolitical point of view. And on the Ukrainian matter, a lot of people would question China's stance on it. But I think given that this has already been on and on for more than 2 to 3 years, I don't think the top administration of China care too much about the public image here. I think it's rather interesting of an interesting side meeting between Xi and the Slovakian prime minister. And actually, the Slovakian prime minister wants to play a role here as a bridge also between China and EU to mediate on some of these political matters. I think this is also very interesting, is that, okay, Slovakia is also an EU member, and they also join the whole thing. And this also shows that there's a bit of a silver lining here that people may still overinterpret. They do want to look ahead, given that everybody seems to want to end the war of Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And so what's going to be next, right? China is going to mend its relations with EU. I'm not so sure about Russia, but there's going to be some sort of a way to mediate through the whole thing.
That's true. So maybe let's shift gears a little bit to the internal domestic situation. I think one of the most, I would say, important events this week about Chinese economy or policy making is the announcement by several finance and the monetary regulators in China about these new monetary push to support the economy. There are rate cuts, there are cuts to reserve requirements, there are introductions of new relending facilities by the PBOC. Then there are also more stimulus in the form of better mortgage rates and all that. It was, I don't think the market had huge expectation about this new round of announcements. And so the market was also not disappointed because it was not high expectation that much all around. And then the policy was also not seen as a breakaway from previous one. It's more like a continuation of this generally more stimulus policies. I say it's one of the most important, but personally, I don't think it's that important. It's just a continuation, an incremental kind of change from the previous stances. And the fiscal policy are still not so much to speak of. You do share the same sentiment that I do here?
I think the normal sort of monetary measures, or you call it the financial sort of loosening, is to be expected, right?
Yeah.
There is this word called the 择机, which means in English, choose the right timing. And the right timing has been delayed quite a few months from the market expectation. I don't think there's much of a positive surprise or a negative surprise here. But I do think there's one thing I really want to point out that could be interesting, is that for the first time in, I forgot this how many years, that China starts to approve new asset management companies for banks. And I think there have been several banks being approved of a new AMCs this year, and include some of like the Merchants Bank, several others that are supposedly more commercial, right? Because previously all the AMCs are the big state-owned banks. I think this could be interesting because the big state-owned banks, AMC, has its own sort of policy mandate. It could be very focused on saving the SOEs, distressed SOEs, or there's saving the property market, or it could be very state-oriented policies. But I do find if there are more AMCs being approved in the banking sector, especially those that are what we call the joint stock banks that have more shareholder base in the private market, then maybe the AMC's investment focus could be a little bit different. It could be related to what we call the new productivity, right? Related to AI, robotics, and all that. And it could be something else. This is something to pay attention to. There's not a lot of a near-term thing to look at. But let's say half a year or a year down the road, when we look at some of the disclosure or the investment that have been made by these AMCs, it could indicate some sort of a clue for the market. And we also, as a market participant, will hear something that they have participated in a certain sector, and that could stir up some excitement or some interesting phenomenon in a certain area. So that's really the one single item that I want to point out if you're interested in sort of investment in China.
Is that because you, as a private equity fund, you will be also looking for these AMCs as your potential investors, LPs? Do you think there's a chance for that?
There have already been LPs actually in a lot of the sort of private equities out there. The problem with the previous approach is that they have a very tight mandate with the state's objectives. And as a result of that, all the GPs or the private equity funds that they invested into, they became a channel of these state-owned banks. It's just, I've decided to invest in this sector like chips or whatever. But I also don't want to bear the responsibility. So why don't you just be my pawn to, or be my agent to invest in this company. And the GB has very little power actually in this regard, especially if this sort of state-owned AMC has a huge voting power in the LP base. Then you have you have no say in this whole thing. And this is the previous issue. Now, we don't know yet how these joint stock banks, sort of AMC, will perform or do, but I do see them to be a little bit more lenient, or at least a bit more market oriented when it comes down to these type of behaviors. So yeah, there's just a bit of a silver lining here.
Great. I think the last item I would want to touch on is I think it's also within the week. There was this big, very interesting video from, of all places, the Central Intelligence Agency of the US, right? There was this big promo video, very public ones, that are basically trying to recruit Chinese spies for them. And I think there are two videos, but I think I only watched one of them, which was really about persuading the people working in the party and state apparatus think about themselves, whether they want to have a better life, that kind of thing. That video was really amazing because it was supposed to be one of the, not the one of, but the most, powerful spy agency in the world. But I think it's the first time for any of this kind of agency to come out and be so public about their recruitment. And interestingly, we would thought the China side will respond heavily to this kind of thing, but I don't think there is, right? Because I think the whole thing has been a little bit like a piece of entertainment, in that just the message that is sent to the potential recruits, if there are any, is that we will welcome any of you self-interested scoundrels. If you really want it, come to us. But then we also don't mind about secrecy, because we could always be so public to it. It does sound work done by a team that is more in the media business, in the entertainment business, rather than in the espionage business. So that's just something amazing. But it's also, I think, worrying to see this US-China competition thing become more and more dramatic. Yeah, so that's something I want to point out and remind our audience, despite all these bigger events happening in the last week. You have anything you want to share about that?
I don't, because there's a lot of public mockery about this thing, which is to be expected, because you made a dramatic show of such thing, and it's not secretive, and it's also from a sort of real objective speaking, it's not gonna make a lot of impact, right?
I don't think so. Yeah.
But I do find it quite interesting in the sense that at least the video I saw is the one is trying to recruit officials from China that is facing a lot of the pressure to go to the US intelligence agencies. We don't know, because we're not in the shoes of those troubled officials. I believe there are still many of them, right? So to a certain extent, maybe we are the wrong audience to look at videos like this. And if we're really in the shoes of a troubled officials, then maybe we will think very differently from that of a citizen's perspective, or like a public media's perspective. So yeah, the only thing that I want to make is that we are not the audience of that. And they are targeting the audience very directly, because probably they could not reach the target audience in a more efficient manner, so they just make it public.
That's true. That's true. So I think that's so much for this week. We want to keep this format to the perfect length of about 30 to 40 minutes. So it won't be too long. It won't be too short. Is there anything more that you want to add here, Johnny?
Maybe just one, like a data thing, is on the export. The April export data came out surprisingly good. I think the April export year-on-year is 8%. That's very interesting because there are some numbers that really jumps out. Is export to ASEAN increased 20%, to Germany increased 20%, to Indonesia it's like a 37%, which is quite amazing. And even to India, we talk about India as like a foe of China right now, but actually export to India increased 20 something percent in April. So I think the overall trade situation, despite the talks going on in Switzerland, which is going to take a while, it seems like China has really found a way to mitigate the impact from the decline in exports. Actually, in April, the US exports dropped like 20% overall. So I think that's very interesting, is that if this phenomenon continues and the export, it doesn't need to stay real in the positive region, just in a mild region that seems controllable, then it surely increases the leverage on the Chinese side.
Agree. Great. Yeah, so that's it for this week. Let's regroup next week, and hopefully we'll have even more dramas for the next week. Okay.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. Talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
See you next week.